welcome to the second slide. So in this slide, like I said in the previous slide, I'm going to go over all of the homework questions. This week we read two excerpts from two books. So we read Spectacles by Sue Perkins, and we read Tender at the Bone by Ruth Reichl. And we'll start with Spectacles because that was where we started in the homeworks. Now the first homework question was, you read an excerpt from Spectacles by Sue Perkins, where she tells a story about going to a theme park. Describe two ways in which Sue and Rob display typical adolescent thinking. So they are adolescents in this book. A couple of you asked questions about that. They were 18 at the time, so they were definitely still in their adolescence. They were older adolescents, but still teenagers. And they display this thinking in a number of ways. We'll start with Rob. So he displayed an impulsivity that wasn't necessarily wise. So in his decision making, he didn't really weigh the pros and cons very well. Instead, he just went gung-ho. And we'll read that bit. Rob and I decided to visit all of the theme parks we could while we were there. Perhaps subconsciously, we wanted to do something innocent and childlike together in the midst of the increasingly grim realities of adulthood. It was a terrible idea. I'd had an overwhelming fear of roller coasters ever since John Daniel's dad detached his retina that time, so anything more rigorous than a teacup and saucer ride is guaranteed to render me giddy with terror. As we approached the entrance to Six Flags Magic Mountain, I started to feel anxious. Me. I hate rides. You know I hate rides. Rob. This isn't a ride, I promise you. We joined a snaking queue of hopped-up adolescents, nervous and not sure what to expect. Sure enough, as we get nearer the entrance, I see the telltale health disclaimers. Me. What is this ride called? Rob. It's not a ride. Stop worrying. Me. Yes, but what is it called? Rob. Isn't this fun? He shouts in what I take to be an attempt to mask the screams coming from above. Me. Why does it say that you have to declare if you have a heart condition? Rob. Oh, you know Americans. It was too late. No sooner had my eyes seen the legend Free Fall than I was bundled into by a joyless teen in a branded t-shirt into the cart. As we started to move, all became clear. Rob got me there on a technicality. No, it wasn't a ride. It was a drop. A sheer drop. A high-speed, zero-gravity drop to the center of the earth. The bars clamped down on my knees and up we went. Up more than 100 feet. Isn't this fun? Screamed Rob again, quickly followed by, Don't cry! Once we reached the top, the cage came to a violent halt. Then it moved forward a little. I could see the whole of North America laid out in front of me. There was a grinding of metal, a slight pause, and then we were let loose. You know those cartoons where the character suddenly drops, but leaves something of themselves behind? That's what happened with my stomach. As my body fell, my guts resolutely remained in the same place. They passed up my windpipe and seemed to hang in the breeze until some complex bit of intestinal wiring forced them back down and inside again. We ended up upside down, breaking sharply, the roots of my hair stiff with fear. That was great, roared Rob, quickly followed by, Susan, would you like to call someone? So that's a really good example of impulsivity. Rob was focusing on what he wanted to do and how much fun he was going to have, and rather than focusing on what was probably best for his girlfriend and his future relationship. So he made the impulsive decision of, hey, let's go on this ride. I'm going to have so much fun and I'm sure you'll be fine, rather than really thinking about what Sue would have wanted and making the rational decision. And then we have Sue. So in adolescence, I was going to say children, but they're not children anymore. They are adolescents. So in adolescence, teens often display egocentricity, and there are two types of egocentricity that are particular to adolescents: personal fable and imaginary audience. And Sue engages in the personal fable aspect of egocentrism right here. Now the best thing, the wonderful thing about the E.T. ride was that you got to say your name into a voice recording machine as you went in, so that E.T. could say goodbye to you, personally, when you left. So I said wanker. It really is impossible to overestimate how thrilled I was as I mounted that bike and slowly ascended to the bright moon above. Fiber optic stars glittered in the black drape of night as the sound stage swelled with the luscious sounds of John Williams strings. And as I began my descent, there he was, E.T., arm stretched, finger lit. As I glided past, he murmured in the distinctive timbre, "Goodbye, wanker." There was a moment, just a moment, when I felt like the funniest person in the world. I was poleaxed with laughter, tears running down my face, and then I heard E.T. continuing behind me. "Goodbye, dickwad. Goodbye, flinchface. Goodbye, numbnuts." That wizened, foul-mouthed alien was spewing the most awful filth. It turns out I wasn't the only one who'd had that idea. Word had got out, and now everyone in the world was doing it. So Sue has this personal favorite that she's incredibly funny. She's the funniest person on the earth, and she's the only one that has thought to say wanker and have E.T. say something foul to her as she's leaving. And then she's quite quickly brought back to earth when she realizes that everybody else is doing it too. So she realizes that this personal fable is not true, but at first, when she first did it, she thought that she was a genius and that she was super funny. And this is really common of adolescents. They think that they're the only ones on the planet who has thought about this fabulous idea or this new thing, when it's not necessarily true. Now, the next question on the homework was, how does the process of decision-making change from childhood to adolescence? Do Sue or Rob show this type of decision-making? So, in childhood, children really aren't capable of rational thought and planning, whereas in adolescence you are. So that's the really big difference in cognition between childhood and adolescence, is the ability to think things through. And in the textbook it discusses, and it's true, that adolescents have the same capacity for rational thought as adults, but they don't tend to engage in it. They tend to focus more on the good outcomes than the bad outcomes, which is a vestige of childhood thinking. And they tend to be impulsive and go, oh yes, it's going to be fabulous, let's do the fun thing. They don't tend to slow down as much and really think things through, unless they're forced to take time. And we see this in the book chapter. So we talked already about the impulsivity. Rob made an impulsive choice, which is an adolescent choice, to take Sue on a ride that he, had he thought about it, would realize was not a good idea, that she wasn't going to like. But then they do stop and they make a rational choice, and it's here in the book. The next day, we went to Universal Studios, where it was agreed we'd do something more sedate. The E.T. ride seemed like a decent compromise. There was an element of roller coaster elevation, albeit at 0.2 miles per hour for him. But there was a good dose of the sentimental and the infantile for yours truly. So they've decided to stop, they've made some rational decisions, and one of the things is, it's the next day. So they've been forced, because things are closed and they had to go back to the hotel and sleep, to stop and think and make a rational decision. They've been forced to take this time, so they can't just jump in gung-ho. Once they've done this, they've decided to make a compromise. So they're going to do something that they will both enjoy. A ride that has some kind of elevation and moving aspect for Rob, but something that is sedate enough that Sue will enjoy it. So this is rational thinking. They've thought about the pros and the cons, and they've come to a mutual decision that works for everybody. And this is really the first time in human development that this is a thing that people do. Children are not really capable of this rational pro and con abstract thinking type decision making, whereas teenagers are, if you force them to take the time to do it. So the final question that was based on Spectacles by Sue Perkins was, Rob forces Sue onto a ride that she does not enjoy. How does this action fit into the moral development of adolescence? So in adolescence, according to Kohlberg's theory, teens are in the conventional morality stage of moral development. And a lot of this focuses on social interactions and individual rights. And so we see this in terms of Rob. He is quite sure that Sue is going to enjoy the ride and is going to have fun if she would just do it. And as such, he can explain away the whole bit about I'm lying to my girlfriend. He is a part of the justice orientation towards of morality. So he believes that it's individual rights and he has the right to enjoy himself, but he also does have a duty to Sue to help her enjoy herself. And that's what he's trying to do. And so this is very much adolescent moral development there. The ends justify the means. Of course they don't. And it did not pay off. She did not enjoy herself. Sue, on the other hand, is showing the care orientation. So the care orientation of moral development focuses more on social relationships and making the people around you happy and making sure that what you do benefits the other people and doesn't make them unhappy or sad or anything. And she shows this by going on the ride. Like, she's quite nervous. She is not happy. And she still got on the ride. Right up until the last moment, she absolutely could have gotten off. It was too late. No sooner had my eyes seen the legend free fall than I was bundled by a joyless teen in a branded t-shirt into the car. She could have stopped. She could have stopped at any point. When she was like, this seems like quite the ride. There are people screaming out there. There's a sign that says free fall. There's a sign that says people with heart conditions shouldn't go on this ride. She could have said no, but she wanted to make her boyfriend happy. She wanted to not upset him, not risk that social relationship. She cared about him, and therefore she was more willing to go along. She was not happy about it, but she did it. And so she's really showing adolescent morality as well in terms of the care orientation, which is more common to women, just like Rob was showing the justice orientation, which is more common to men. So that is it for spectacles. And then the final two questions were from Tender at the Bone by Ruth Reichl. So the first question from Ruth Reichl was, you read an excerpt from Tender at the Bone by Ruth Reichl describing her transition at 14 to a boarding school in Quebec. How are Ruth's self-concept and self-esteem affected in this passage? What influences these changes? So Ruth's self-esteem and self-concept are really affected in this book, and we see it in a number of ways. So we're going to start with, by the next morning, I was sure I was wrong. Numbly, I shrugged in my new blouse and my navy jumper and followed the girls through the long corridors, down the stairs, past the ornate lobby, and into the dining room in the basement. It was windowless, with a long oilcloth-covered picnic table, and it smelled day and night like boiled beef. The girls stood behind their bowls of café au lait, waiting for Mademoiselle Petit, the mouse mother, to sit down. Then they bowed their heads, crossed themselves, and sang a song that began, Bénissez-nous, Seigneur. I stared down into the café au lait. Mange, commanded Mademoiselle. I tapped my fingers against the side of the bowl and said under my breath, Cheerio, have a nice day. And then I started crying again. So she's clearly missing home, and she's trying to bring some of the English language customs that she grew up with back into her life. And she's trying to hold on to that self-concept of she's an American and she speaks English. Then we move on and we get to the bit about nothing made sense to me. I was on Mars, where no sound, no smell, no emotion was familiar. Even my own thoughts had become alien, and I despised the whining mass of misery I seemed to be. I spent most of my time writing in my diary, chiding myself for being so unhappy, waiting until it was time to call home. Let me come back, I pleaded. I knew Dad wanted me back, but my mother always answered, and the answer was always the same. No. So she doesn't even recognize herself. Her self-concept is clearly someone who is more happy and more confident in herself, but she's not recognizing herself. She's become this whining mass, and she doesn't recognize herself. So this is her self-concept. She's changing who she is, and she doesn't like it. And part of the reason this self-concept is changing is because her self-esteem. Her self-esteem is affecting her self-concept, and we learn quite a bit about her self-esteem and how it's being affected in the passage as well. So we know that her self-esteem is affected because partly because she doesn't speak French, so she can't communicate with those around her. And this is a fundamental thing of humanity. We are social creatures, we communicate, and that is the most important thing to us, is this communication, this socialization, and she's unable to do this. So she's feeling isolated and she's feeling stupid because all of the girls her age can speak in French and are doing just fine in classes. And then her teachers are making her feel even more stupid by publicly giving out her grades. We saw this here. Madame Cartier certainly didn't think I would get it. She acted as if I were slow and wayward stranger who had been foisted upon her, and when she announced exam scores, she always seemed disgusted. Zéro, un fois de plus pour Mademoiselle Reichel, she would say pityingly, as if any person of normal intelligence would have learned to speak French, much less spell it by now. So she's announcing that Ruth got a 0 on her exam to the entire class and is being very disparaging about it. And so this is affecting her because at home, Ruth is clearly a good student, and here she's not. And then she's also being bullied by one of the girls. A few of the girls took their cues from the teacher. The worst was the banker's daughter, Beatrice, the richest girl in school. Her father was said to be very close to General de Gaulle. She had never actually spoken to me, but she had discovered my secret cache of candy, cake, and novels, and tortured me by moving it. I knew she was the culprit because she brazenly ate an eclair in my presence, daring me to do something. I shrugged. I suspected that she stole my mail too, but I felt helpless. The odd thing is if she hadn't been so mean to me, I would have admired her. She was constantly collecting mauvais notes, bad notes, for whispering in class, but not being prepared. Once for daring to talk back to Madame Cartier when she spoke of Australian savages. So she's being bullied, and this is never good for an adolescent's self-esteem. So her peers are rejecting her teachers are rejecting her, and this is really hard for her, especially because she can't communicate the way that she could in English. And this is really lowering her self-esteem and then changing her self-concept because she doesn't recognize this person that she is becoming. And then the final question, how does Janine view Ruth? What type of behavior is she displaying when she defends Ruth? Is this typical of adolescence? Why or why not? Hello. Do you want to come up? When assembly was over, Janine, who seemed to have appointed herself my guardian, grabbed my sleeve and pulled me along a hall. Accustomed to the raucous freedom of an American high school, I was shocked by the silence. The girls watched their feet as they walked to their lessons and bobbed their heads in a silent curtsy each time a teacher passed. Janine led me into a severely orderly classroom and pushed me into a desk next to hers. The room smelled of steam, heat, wet wool, and perspiration. Janine tried to tell me something, but of course it was incomprehensible. Looking at my watch, I realized that at this very moment a week ago, on a faraway planet, my best friend Jeannie and I had been walking into homeroom. Je t'en, said an icy voice. Janine tugged desperately at my sleeve. I looked up and realized that all the other girls were on their feet. I leapt up. A small woman stood at the front of the classroom, fixing me with a look of hostile disapproval. She was colorless as the classroom, dressed in a black skirt and drab cardigan. She wore no makeup, and even her short, straight hair seemed to have no particular color. She leveled her pointer directly at me and unleashed a stream of angry words. Janine said something, clearly in my defense, and the pointer went down. The hostile stare did not. Madame Cartier looked me up and down, shook her head slightly, and said, Bien, asseyez-vous. The girls sat down at the same time, as if they were a single organism. I was a beat behind. So Janine is defending Ruth, and this is very common. So in adolescence, especially girls create friendships, and they bond quite easily. They will pack bond very easily, if you will. And they also engage in pro-social behavior. Girls are more likely to stand up for each other and stand up for the powerless because they don't want to be seen as unkind, but they also don't want other people to be mean to their friends. So Janine is acting pro-socially and as a friend, and yes, this is very common. It is totally normal for adolescents to stand up, and it's also a moral thing to a certain extent. So it's the care orientation of moral development in adolescence. The Janine is showing that she's doing the right thing, which is standing up for the powerless and saying, no, you're wrong, Madame Cartier. She doesn't understand what's happening. She doesn't know any better. Be nice. Now, obviously, Janine would have said it a lot nicer than that and a lot more respectfully than that, but that's what she's doing. She's making the moral choice and the pro-social choice of defending Ruth against someone who is being mean to her, and that is completely fitting into adolescent development. I hope this has been helpful going over the homework questions. The rest of the slides are focusing on early adulthood and the various things that we're learning about this week related to that. And I will see you next week. Or if you have signed up for a meeting this week, I will see you at that time.